So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the year that was, the current state of the workplace, and our expectations and predictions for the year ahead. My name is Gethin Nadin. I'm Director Employee Wellbeing at Benefix, and today I'm joined by two people who are very familiar to you if you are a Benefix customer, and to those who aren't yet a Benefix customer will become very familiar to you when you inevitably sign up and join us, join our customer community. And so I'm delighted to be joined by Kathryn Kendall, Chief People Officer at Benefix, and Michael Tigwell, Chief Operating Officer at Benefix. Hi both.
Hi all.
And so, as always, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions or comments for any of the three of us, if you want to agree or disagree with some of the things we've said or share some experiences within your own organizations, please use the chat and Q&A functionality on Zoom to do that, and we will get to those questions, as many of those as we possibly can. But first of all, I wanted to look back on 2021 and just reflect on some of the challenges that we've had this year, or last year. From my perspective, in a kind of well-being context, we've continued to see that this big, kind of pretty significant commitment to employee well-being continue throughout 2021. And I think as 2020 kind of saw the well-being as almost an industry and a concept advanced by perhaps 10 years, in my opinion, in 2020, I think this year in 2021, we started to see employers to become a little bit more discerning about well-being and a little more kind of strategy focused on actually how am I making a difference to people rather than just the reactionary nature that some people took to well-being in 2020. So because we were kind of no longer reacting to that pandemic, we were thinking more long-term about getting through the rest of the pandemic, which has clearly gone on for longer than we all expected. But also, how do I support people in the long term? Because we're now well aware of the data that shows how employees are going to struggle with various different health matters as we kind of hopefully see this pandemic come to a close and recover from that. And what we started to see at Benefix is kind of this huge surge in kind of benefit budgets being increased. So we started to see employers spend more money on benefits. Clearly, lots of that was well-being related as well. General investment in well-being increased, so people were buying more products, people were looking and exploring that kind of well-being market a little bit more for tech and apps that could support their people. And we even saw higher benefit take-up, so we saw employees themselves showing an increased interest in and the adoption of benefits. And so it really felt like 2021, from my perspective, was this kind of benefits renaissance, where we kind of went through this reappreciation for both employer and employee of benefit schemes. And our own new reward director research found that, the top three things that HR said they were going to be most concerned with in 2022 was going to be well-being, sustainability, and diversity and inclusion. And across the kind of 50 odd workshops I ran with our customers last year, 50 articles written, kind of 65, 70 talks, those common themes kept returning. So people were really focused on that. And so I'd like to come to you first, Kathryn. Kind of, does any of that resonate with you as a Chief People Officer? Is that kind of stuff that you've been seeing too?
Yeah, massively. I mean, it's so nice to sit down and have a chance to reflect on the last 2 years, because I don't know about the two of you, but it feels like we've just been going at breakneck speed. And I'm sure all of our customers are feeling that really acutely as well, that we got thrown into the pandemic in March 2020. And effectively, it's been nearly 2 years of crisis management during this time. And it's ebbed and flowed, right? It hasn't been consistent. But, as you allude to, Gethin, we've kind of had it's all over. Oh, goodness, there's a new variant and it's starting again. So I think probably what stands out from what you've just said, and it'd be interesting, Michael, to hear how much this is reflected in the customer conversations you're having, is it feels from an HR perspective, sat there on the front line of HR, you are juggling more challenges than ever before. There are more things coming to HR. And I think this is a really positive thing, right? I think HR has for a long time sought to be that really trusted advisor within an organization. There's been lots of fighting for seats at boardroom tables. I mean, I think that door is firmly open, because I think in the pandemic, business leaders have come to HR and gone, help, what do we do? This is such a human crisis. But I think HR are spinning a lot of plates. And I think they're doing all of this, to your point, Gethin, against this real backdrop of well-being need. It's like well-being, like I've never really seen it before, because I think the impact of the pandemic on our people's mental health, and this is right across the spectrum, from people who might perhaps have suffered with mental health problems for a long period of time, to those who perhaps have been fortunate enough never to really have to consider their mental health before, to suddenly find, through whether it's, kind of lockdown, homeschooling, juggling various different hats and various different plates at the same time, I've seen more and more requirement from our people, certainly within Benefex, but I think this is reflected across my network. People just need that human interaction. Actually, if I look at what myself and my team have been asked to do over the last 24 months, more than anything, it's just that be that person, be there for me. And I think, it's been a really, really sage reminder of why we have that human resources. We need that human interaction. I mean, I don't know, Michael, if that's reflected in sort of the conversations you've had from a customer perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you summarised it really well. And, when I reflect back on, I guess, the benefits landscape a few years ago, there's probably still a tendency that, putting a benefit in place, that was the end of the conversation or the task for HR and reward. Businesses still saw them as a perk, rather than a tool that helped solve a challenge. And what's clear is the pandemic has forced a focus on ways that, businesses can solve some really meaty challenges. Like when you talk about well-being, and we talk about it, we talk about it every day. We talk about well-being, diversity, equity and inclusion, sustainability. On their own, these are massive, massive topics that are incredibly, incredibly complex. So, we are definitely seeing HR contacts and customers going, okay, expectation has changed massively for us now. It's no longer, hey, we'll put a benefit in place because it's a nice thing for people to have. It's how do we use these tools at our disposal to solve some really complex, challenging problems for the business. So you're right, it's definitely raised the profile of HR and reward across organizations that we're speaking to. But interestingly, I think that how thin people are spread right now. So I think you could spin your wheels trying to solve any one of those three challenges that we've mentioned already. And then, as you've articulated, Kathryn, there's this need for that human touch more so than ever from HR. So what gives? How do you get across all of those bases, come up with something that's truly fit for purpose, that takes care of every individual? It's really difficult. And I think it's one of the reasons why, we're seeing more requests. We are looked to for more ideas around, how we can take some of that strain away, particularly using technology to communicate and surface content so that, you have time and your colleagues have time to spend with employees, solving personal issues, again, filling those gaps that we've lost as we've all kind of moved to a remote working pattern, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it is fascinating. I think when you look at, for as long as we've all been in this industry or these types of roles, that HR remit is quite clearly expanded pretty significantly over the last couple of years. HR was already doing a few of these things, but they've become a much bigger part of the role. And I think if we look at reward and benefits, reward and benefits people in our research found this out, are being asked to kind of contribute to these wider goals that the business has or their organization has that they've never had before. So, we are getting RFPs in, which are basically saying, if we come and buy your products for you, how is us using Benefex enhancing our approach to diversity and inclusion? How is us working with you making us more sustainable? And we know that with the government networks that we work on, the procurement frameworks we're part of, they've all changed in the last 12 months with all these very strong requirements and preferences for sustainability. So the government's saying, I'm not going to do business with you unless you tick a lot of these boxes. And so it feels like every department in big employers is being saying, like, we've got these big lofty goals around D&I or sustainability. And each one of you, whether it's sales, marketing, HR, has to show how are you contributing to this thing. And our reward director showed that actually that expanding reward director role is now, how are you helping us to be more sustainable? And that's leading clearly lots more customers coming to us and saying, how do I deliver benefits that help me reach my sustainable goals? So, can you offer things like electric cars that will help my people reduce their own CO2 emissions, but collectively our reward function can report back to the business to say, because 300 more people have now moved from petrol or diesel to electric, we've reduced our CO2 output as a kind of group of people by X amount of tons. And does that help the business show how they're making a positive impact on the world? And I think that's significant. I think it's great, exactly as you said, Kathryn, because those people in those roles in HR and reward are getting more attention from the board because you're demonstrating you can actually do more than most boards thought you would. But I think it's a significant change. I think it's, and the same with reward and benefits. I think, Michael, when you and I first got into this kind of industry, benefits were almost entirely, how do I get this person back in the seat doing the job as quickly as possible? I don't want them to be off with a bad back. I want their bad back sorted, back on the desks and start working. And now that has clearly evolved to actually these social issues have been pushing upon employers, where actually now we're starting to look at, well, actually I have this duty of care to look after them and help them in their own lives. And I think that's been fascinating to see as well, how those external social issues are affecting employees. And I think I've had weird conversations with customers over the last 6 months where they are looking to us to find solutions to NHS waiting lists because they don't want their employees to wait too long for surgery, because clearly that's a stressful, uncomfortable period of time, waiting 12 months for a kidney operation. So I think it's fascinating change. All it took was a pandemic, but it's a fascinating step forward, I think.
I think there, Gethin, there's kind of, to pick up on one of the points you made there, because I think you're right, those are three of the big topics that have definitely been talked about. And my concern, and it's back to the plates many thing, when you've got HR teams spread thinly, is there's this real accountability to the wider boards. And that's brilliant. That's a great thing to hear, that these topics are really forming high on leadership strategic agendas. But I think as HR teams, we have a real responsibility not to lose the real understanding and the appreciation of the impact on the individuals. Because if we think back to why are we here as an HR function? We're here to ensure we're delivering that employee experience as such, so that our people can give of their best, which is clearly great for them and great for the business and great for our customers. And my worry with some of the stuff that I see now, let's take DE&I as a really, really good example. I think there's a real wide understanding as to why this is really, really important, why it's not just a box ticking exercise. Well, it's really important for the business, it's important for our people, it's important because of our moral obligations and what we should be doing in society. I think we have to be really careful not to get caught up into the, kind of the strategy and the high level stuff and everything, without also remembering, but how is this truly making a difference to our people on the ground? Because if it's not truly making a difference, we can have the best strategies and the best processes in the world. And it's true for every element of HR, right? But it's coming back to, how is this actually making a positive impact? How is this positively changing our workforce and our employee experience for the better? And it's where I come back to, I think, one of the most important things I've learned during the pandemic, because there has been nobody's done this before, right? You can't go back and go, well, how did we deal with the last great pandemic? That we didn't have the internet, there's no information out there. That real importance of listening. And I think that's kind of like, if I were to sort of say one thing I think as HR practitioners and as business leaders as well, that we must take through into this next stage. We fast tracked the future of work, and in many ways I think that's amazing. But if we're going to get this next stage right, and believe me, I think this next stage is one of the hardest stages of all, we've got to listen to our people, and we cannot get blinkered. And I think, again, that in itself, that takes time, but I think that's so key to driving the right outcomes going forward.
Well, the workplace is an interesting part as well, is because we are living in this world where it feels like most companies now are on this kind of turning point or this cliff edge, which is kind of, what does hybrid look like for us? And as you said, what does hybrid look like to a diverse or marginalized employee? And how does that, with our D&I hat on and our sustainability hat on, what does the future of the workplace look like? So, because there are obviously arguments for, well, if you've got 100 people in one office being heated by one source and one source of lighting, is that more economical than people commuting and getting on buses and trains and driving and sitting at home using 100 different heating systems? But then you've got to balance that with lots of stuff you've talked about at previous webinars, Kathryn, around, we have people where home is not a safe space, and so working from home is not conducive to their well-being. There are lots of stats out there at the moment that, there are people who home just isn't set up for them to work. I think something I've mentioned on these webinars before, 1 in 8 people in the UK don't have access to an outdoor space or shared garden. You're 4 times more likely to be in that situation if you're a black employee. And so working from home, marginalized employees are more likely to be living in kind of flats and shared accommodation and things like that. And are we taking that diversity into account when we're saying come back to the office or stay remote or work 4 days a week? It feels like there's so many moving parts. We don't really have all the data to make some of these decisions that we're being forced to.
100%, and I think hybrid generally. I mean, let's throw in another plate for HR teams to spin. But I think for all organisations that are now facing what is probably a hybrid future of work, I don't think there's really any organisations out there who have truly wrapped their head around what that means. What does that mean for the employee experience? What does that mean for our culture? And, might be really interesting to understand perhaps what we've seen from some of our customers. But, I think there's lots of organisations out there with great organisational cultures. But I know from our own experience at Benefex, I'd be the first to put my hand up and say, we've absolutely felt the impact on our culture as a result of just not having that regular time together, because a culture is created by one another. It's by those relationships, again, that really human interaction. I'm yet to see a good way, and there may well be a great way out there that people are finding to replicate that remotely, but I'm yet to see it. And I think it's a huge challenge for the HR profession going forward, and for businesses in general. People want to feel that sense of belonging. They want to feel that culture, that purpose, that sense of we're in this together. How do you do that with a dispersed workforce? I don't know, Michael, what we're seeing from a customer perspective in that area.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm not going to be able to give you any silver bullet in terms of an answer if that's what you're after, Kathryn. But I can kind of reflect, I guess, some of the comments that you made. I think particularly in the first lockdown, the pandemic, we saw a huge amount of contact from our customers going, okay, we understand that some form of remote working is going to be in place for the foreseeable future. And to that point around, how do we make people still feel connected with the company that they work for? How do we promote our culture? It was one of the main things they were looking for us to solve. We saw a big uptake in terms of things like our recognition tools. So, ensuring that culture of giving thanks, those personal touches remained within an organization, whilst everyone sort of figured out how we manage the world of work going forward. In terms of what the future looks like, and, do we see any customers that are really got it figured out? I don't think I can think of an example. I think what people acknowledge is that, the best things we can do right now, as you say, is listen to employees, but then give them choice. And interestingly, in terms of that employee voice, the feedback that we're hearing from employee populations, our sort of new reward director research kind of highlighted that. I think 79% of multinational organizations are saying, their employees are proactively telling them that they want more, they want access to more benefits, they want access to more help when it comes to remote working. So, our employee groups have a clear sense of what they want, what they need, what would be helpful for them right now. Like you say, the key is to listen to them, and then take some meaningful action, something that's going to actually make a difference. It might not be a perfect solution that solves every problem for every person, but I think just one, listening, and two, taking some action that shows you've heard and that you care, is arguably the best we can do right now.
And we've got data to back that up, right? So a report that we haven't yet published, but will be in the next month or so, we know that when you offered more choice in your benefit scheme, when people could personalize it, you got higher engagement. So it didn't matter what those benefits were, but when people saw that you were personalizing those packages more and offering more choice, there was more in it for people to engage with. So, again, fascinating. I think the challenge is going to be, I can't be all things to all people. So how do I give enough choice without kind of drowning in the admin associated with offering 100 benefits? But I think that's been quite interesting to see that discerning employee demanding more, I think, is going to be a common theme. And I guess if I could come on to 2022, Kathryn, because that leads me on to, the great resignation, the data around people either quitting their jobs last year or having an intention or saying they've got an intention to broadly seems to be 40 to 50% in most countries. Whether that materializes or not is to be seen. But this discerning employee that's demanding more from their employer, do you see that as being a challenge for you? Do you think attracting and retaining people is going to be harder than perhaps ever before?
Massively, and I think, you know, all the data I'm seeing, it's been felt acutely across every single sector. What we saw was this phenomenon where for probably most of 2020 people sat tight on jobs because they were understandably nervous about job security with the pandemic going on. We came out sort of, you know, kind of springtime going into early summer in 2021, and you suddenly saw this mass movement. And what that's done is it's done some really strange stuff from a market forces perspective. You know, we've seen entry salaries going through the roof. We also saw the article on the BBC yesterday where, you know, sort of graduate lawyers going in 150 grand starting salaries. You know, we've seen typical salaries, starting salaries, mid-level, higher level salaries increase by 20, 30, 40%. And we're seeing this across all sectors, right? This isn't something that is just common to the technology or financial services sectors. This is being seen right across the market. Now, I think that will settle, but I think that will settle at a new level because, to your point, I do think employees rightly are asking and expecting so. But my personal view is, I don't think it's necessarily salaries where organisations will differentiate. I think actually what employees are looking for is they're looking for that continuation of choice. And that's choice in all areas. They want to choose where they work, when they work, how they work, the equipment they have, the benefits they have. I think lots of employees are looking at their organisations understandably and saying, well, look, when you know, kind of the proverbial hit the fan, the pandemic went on and we kind of all pulled together, we worked remotely, or if we were working in maybe retail, we were in and we came to the front line, we expect to see that coming back. And I think that we're going to start to see this real sort of division from an employee experience perspective of ultimately, I mean, let's be blunt about it, those organisations who choose to trust their people and those who choose not to. And I think it is going to be as stark as that. I think you will see those organisations who are committed to continuing to develop that employee experience, where you will have that hybrid approach, where you will have that flexibility. That brings its own challenges, right? You know, communication strategies, culture, bringing together that sense of belonging. But I think there will be a marked difference between those organisations and those organisations who seek to try and go back to the old way of working. But I think, you know, the stable door is open, the horse is kind of like several miles ahead in the distance. And I think there's going to be some really stark choices for organisations to make.
Michael, how does that play into what you think the market will change in the future? Do you think there are any changes we'll see as quickly as this year with regards to either how we're going to be helping customers or the challenges that they start to bring to us that maybe we don't even see much of at the moment?
Yeah, you know what, I think we started to see those challenges and we've talked about them a little bit already, but I think just picking up on sort of a couple of points that, you know, Kathryn made before, this point around employee power, if that's how you want to describe it. I think one of the key things that organizations need to consider is that people want to work for companies that reflect their own values. So ensuring that you've got appropriate policies, you know, that reflect your corporate responsibility is key. Ensuring you're offering a choice of benefits that reflect those is obviously, you know, the next step. And I remember, Gethin, just to show I do listen, you know, when you speak, probably going back a couple of years, you did a presentation about, you know, the distrust that particularly younger workers have of big business today, and the fact that, you know, actually they're looking for employees that share the same value. And, you know, benefit offerings, using them to solve challenges that are personal to individuals is one way an organisation can go about doing that. Now, the problem I see going forward is what we started to see is, as we talked about already, those challenges that HR and reward teams are facing are reflecting what's happening in the wider world. So we have a focus on wellness because of the pandemic. We have diversity, equity and inclusion, you know, which was really, I guess, the current round of narrative kick-started by Floyd George. You know, we also have sustainability being top of mind for you know, lots of people right now. I see that trend continuing, and when we think each one of those topics is huge in itself, if we start trying to forecast what the next thing's going to be, Is it going to be the cost of living crisis, for example, with inflation due to rise? I suspect it probably will be. You know, we're going to be piling that challenge on top, and undoubtedly, you know, HR and reward teams will be tasked at finding ways to help employees address that challenge too. And in time, it will be the next one and the next one. And that 3 we talked about at the start is soon going to be half a dozen and more. Now, there's obviously a solution to all of those problems. I think in terms of a benefits program, when you just think about the complexity that adds, and how you make sense of all those disparate providers and policies and everything else, and surface it in a way that people understand, I think that's going to be the next big challenge that, you know, our reward teams need to tackle. And that's one of the main things we've been focused on at Benefex, is actually how do we create products that allow people to consolidate all of that content in one place? How do we help them build content around it that helps educate and explain how each of those things makes their lives better? And that's what our new product Home is going to focus squarely on going forward for 2022. But undoubtedly, you know, whilst there is a solution, whilst there's going to be a pathway through it, the nature of these topics means it is not an easy problem for anyone to solve right now.
And I think it's fascinating because you mentioned about the cost of living increases. I completely agree. I think that's going to feel like a real life wage cut for a lot of people this year. And you know, lots of people, and as with all of these things, it hits the kind of marginalised, younger and lower paid workers again, same as the pandemic has. And you know, there's a cohort that hasn't really had any relief since the 2008 financial crisis because they keep getting hardest hit by these things. You know, we've been talking about financial wellbeing for 10 years or so. I think it was by late 2019, we were talking about how financial resilience was being eroded for millions of people because we had a stagnant savings habit and people were kind of taking out consumer debt at the highest rate they had in quite a long time as we recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. We then started 2020 and went into a pandemic, which eroded that further. And the reason why the UK government reacted so quickly with the furlough scheme is because they knew that people could not survive for more than a very short period of time on the savings they currently had. And now we're going out of this pandemic and the economy is starting to recover, but individual finances are about to get worse. And so I think those people that committed to financial wellbeing 3 years ago and did loads of great things, it's a really good illustration of your job is never done. You don't finish wellbeing and walk away. There's this continual investment and reassessment of, if I can't focus on everything to do with well-being, what am I going to focus on, or where do I think my people are going to get the most support? And and as you were talking then, it just made me think about the HR role in particular, because as a function and as an industry, you have survived the pandemic so far. We've got through the pandemic. Your people have worked harder than they usually would. They've been dealing with change in regulations. They've had to get familiar with things like payroll changes and all these new benefits that we're adding. You know, somebody has to do that work and somebody has to become familiar with how do I roll these things out and how do I communicate them. So, Kathryn, what about burnout specifically for HR teams? And is that, how long, you know, kind of what your views on that and how long you think it's going to take us to perhaps recover from the specific experiences that the HR industry has had?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Gethin. It's something I worry about a lot because I think it's one of the unspoken pieces out there. I think there's a general acknowledgement that collectively people's mental health and wellbeing has been impacted undoubtedly by the pandemic. And, you know, goodness, working in HR is not for a moment comparable to working on the front line in the NHS during this crisis. And I wouldn't dream for a moment of trying to compare the two. In fact, I think it's been an enormous privilege to work on the front line of HR during what's been such a human crisis to deal with. But nevertheless, you're absolutely right. You know, HR teams have been absolutely front and central in dealing with some really challenging employee situations, you know, being almost invited in virtually to people's homes, seeing some of the challenging circumstances people are experiencing. I also think, to your point in terms of sort of what support's available, I think more and more people are turning to their employers for help, because, you know, if we take mental health as an example, and I'm a huge staunch supporter of the NHS, but we cannot doubt that there is insufficient funding for mental health. There was prior to the pandemic, let alone now. So people faced with waiting lists that are many, many months long are coming to their employers and saying, help, I need to be helped now. And typically that is coming straight to those HR and those reward teams to kind of say, you know, I need help. So I think, you know, HR are definitely not the only profession that will have been impacted by this, but I think, you know, for all HR teams out there, I do worry that we are sitting on kind of like, you know, potentially people who haven't had that chance to decompress, because we have gone from one stage of this pandemic to the next. Now, as we've all identified, there are a load of different challenges that it's HR's responsibility absolutely to respond to and to meet. And I think HR teams in the main are really keen to respond to those challenges. You know, I think there's, as I say, we've been brought front and centre during this crisis. I think it's a real opportunity to kind of, you know, demonstrate the role that HR has within the business. But I think there is going to be a necessity of prioritising what are the things that are really important to us. And it's where I think we all have to be a little bit careful not to get too swept up in, you know, kind of the trends that are out there, you know, oh, HR should be looking at this, should be looking at that. What you need to be looking at is going to be entirely dependent on your organisation and on your people. And I'm sure, Michael, if we look at our customer base, what's going to be a right priority for one customer is going to be very different to another customer in another sector. So I think we are going to have to develop some laser-like focus, because it is always going to be better to do one or two things really, really well and have a massive impact for our people than try and do 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 things and actually end up ticking a few boxes. But at the end of it, have we really moved the dial forward? Have we really changed the future of the work for the better, for our people, for our business, for our customers? I think that's the question we have to be asking ourselves.
I think, and something I wanted to talk about as well, and Michael, you can help me with this one. Many years ago, Benefex did some research where we found, I think the results were something like employees had to access about 28 different systems in order to do their job on average across the world. And half of those were HR related. So you had holiday absence management, online pay slips, benefits, pensions, share schemes, whatever, you know, the list kind of goes on. Are we making that problem even worse with the approach that many take for well-being? Because we're going out, many employers are going out there and buying a mindfulness app and a mental health app. They're getting apps and platforms provided by their income protection life assurance providers. And so it feels like where that 28 felt like it was a lot a few years ago, we might be compounding that problem and making that tech employee experience pretty confusing.
Yeah, there's definitely that danger, right? You know, as the problems grow and the tools at our disposal grow, you know, it comes with problems, and that's the number of disparate providers, the number of places that people can go for the information and help that they need. And I think what you're more likely to see, you know, unless you have a way to focus people and to educate people that, hey, if I've got a well-being question or problem, or I'm interested in the well-being benefits on offer, you know, where do I go? And that should be one place, right? It shouldn't be, oh, okay, if it's a well-being benefit I'm interested in, I go over here. I've got a question about a well-being policy, it's over here. If it's some education, it's somewhere else. Now, when you think about, you know, in our new reward director research, the highest performing organizations in terms of engagement offered, you know, in excess of 20 benefits. You know, that's 20 benefits, 20 benefit providers potentially, it's 20 groups of information, it's 20 different places. People will just stop looking after a while. If you can't find your answer really quickly, you know, most of us will know we'll give up or we'll go somewhere else. So there is definitely a requirement. Also, I would say for the sanity of HR, so you're not getting asked constantly, where do I go for X, where do I go for Y in terms of information that they might need. So yeah, you know, this piece around how do you harness technology to consolidate that content, to build journeys and links where you have providers that offer complementary you know, services that, you know, actually link together really well. Unfortunately, individual providers aren't going to help you join those dots themselves. is going to take some work and some designing. And as I've alluded to before, that's currently our big focus, both from a product point of view, but also in terms of some of the strategies that we're working with customers on is, okay, once we've established what tools are available at your disposal, how do we link them together? How do we wrap education around them so everyone understands how to use them? And then how do you communicate so everyone knows where to look for them? And they're really kind of the steps we need to go through.
Yeah, I think the way you kind of described home, and the one thing I like about the home product that we've got coming is benefit platforms have historically been pretty passive. They've required an employee to go in and look through stuff, find something that's interesting, find something that's going to solve a problem for them, select it, and kind of run away and do whatever they need to do with that benefit. But with that choice and with that complexity that we know that exists in most modern schemes, with the diverse needs of a very quick changing workforce, we're at this point where actually you need to be more kind of active. You need to pull people into the system more. So you need to reach people at the right time with the right message to get them engaged in things. So it might be, if you take that financial well-being, for example, we know those kind of rates are going up and people are seeing in the news electricity rates are going to go up. People are seeing in the news interest rates are going up. People are seeing these things in the news. They'll get the notifications around April about the national insurance increase. So as people are hearing that thing as consumers, as employees are hearing that news as consumers, what are we doing to remind them that their benefit scheme can support them through some of those challenges in their lives? When are we reaching out to them to say, look, we know your salary is about to go down because of this change in national insurance, but we have these tools available that we think can really make your pay go further by saving on some of the things you're spending on every day. And I think that is a growing challenge for every employer. You've mentioned about, we can't just keep throwing stuff on reward and benefit, and HR teams are already really busy. So tech has to be the way to help people do a lot of that stuff. And I think that's a fascinating journey that we've all been on at Benefex with the product team over the last year or so is, how do we make that process better for the employee themselves, but also the employer? I'm personally quite excited about how that changes 2022 for us and our industry as well.
I think, home, when you think about the problem, we said we've gone from a place where offering benefits was the end goal. Hey, here's some nice perks that are nice to have. Here's your pension and your PMI, and you should be happy. To now, it's about solving challenges. So the way we talk to employees about what we're offering needs to change, and home enables you to do that. I think for most people, and unless you have a specific challenge and it's top of mind, this is going to be very unpopular. Most people find benefits boring. And so if you send out a communication that says, hey, come to this place, I've got something really interesting to tell you about critical illness, I'm guessing your click-through rates might not be that high. Whereas actually, if you're starting to surface content that talks about problems that everyone's experiencing, or even individualized content that resonates with that person, that's a great gateway to then get them to think about, okay, if you have an interest in X or you've got a problem with Y, here are all the ways that our organization supports you and can help you. And some of that might be education, some of that might well be, a benefit that you can select or make use of. But for me, as the problem changes, the way we communicate has to change too. And that's what home will let you do.
I think, it's a really good example, I think, of the content. I think is really interesting because I'm seeing more and more people talk about content in the workplace, and some of that is educational content that can provide, as you've mentioned, context around a benefit. So it might make you think. It takes an old benefit, and content can take an old benefit and point it at a new problem, and people can then think about that benefit. Or actually, that solves a different problem to me than what I thought. I could use it to solve that problem. And in almost every theory of health behavior change, that education is a precursor to positive behavior change. So when you start to educate people a little bit more and then be able to say, I've changed your opinion on something, now I'm giving you a route to go and make a change, those two things together I think are really powerful. And when I was trying to explain how home as a concept, and I didn't want this to be a sales pitch for home, but I thought this was relevant. I was trying to explain it to my dad, and we were talking about how if you ever go to these secondhand car warehouses where they have got like 2,000 cars in stock, they don't let you just go and browse the cars and find which ones are interesting. And that's what I think benefit schemes used to be like. You used to just open the door, let somebody wander around and see what piqued their interest. Those warehouses tend to have some pretty slick, smarmy sales guy with an iPad who basically says, what do you want a car for? And you're like, well, I've got 4 kids and I've got a dog, so it's got to be a big car. I go to school and we go away on camping trips. And they ask you all these questions, and they ask your budget and what brand you like. And rather than let you loose into a car park full of 2,000 cars, they will take you to the 10 cars that they think will be of most interest to you. And that, in a benefit scheme context, I think becomes really powerful, because you're then showing people the things they want. But if you remember what they tell you, you can go back to them a week later and say, I know you had kids, and I know the school holidays are coming up, so have you thought about kids passes or Virgin activity days or whatever the benefit is? And I think that it becomes really, really exciting, because you're solving more problems for people at the right time.
Empowering people as well, aren't you? Because I do think, one of the big things I see post-pandemic is people are desperate to feel back in control. It's been a real trend of the last 2 years, is that we've all had to acknowledge we've got no control over the situation. So I think empowering employees, it's back to this cultural piece, it's back to this sense of belonging. Actually, I have that knowledge, I am empowered, I do feel that I can make those positive choices. And selfishly, from an HR perspective, what it's doing as well is it's taking away a lot of those low value add conversations, which are really necessary, right? Because people need to know how to get the kids pass or how to log on and adjust their life insurance, whatever it might be. But by taking those away, coming back to that human to human interaction, you then free up your HR teams to have those really powerful value add conversations. And that's where I think we make the biggest difference as a profession this year.
And I think on that point as well, something that came up when I was speaking to a magazine this week was this idea of when employees are under so much stress, when you have workplaces at the moment that might have 20, 30% absence rates. We know the NHS is one of those, where less people are having to do more work because of the absence rates. If that kind of thing continues, I've been asked by a few employers, how do I help the people who are still here? And it's like, you can't take the work away from them. You can't, they're all going to be busy. And I think people can put up with stress and busyness for a period of time, certainly when they know there's an end to it. But that's that social aspect of work, where what can employers do to dial down some of the other stresses in their life, which might make them better placed to deal with some of the stresses they're going to have to face in the workplace. And I think that's quite interesting. And I think, as Michael touched upon, you've started to see employers picking up where things like the state aren't. And we mentioned mental health support being really bad in this country. It's bad in almost every developed country across the world, has been before the pandemic, massively underfunded. And employers are picking up that mantle. They are the number of times I have conversations with employers about the United Nations 17 sustainability goals, which include good health and well-being and diversity and inclusion. It's all about how do workplaces have this positive impact on society. And there's some really interesting case studies coming out of people like Barclays and PwC and Unilever, who are showing that commitment to working in that way that serves the public purse, the public interest, individual health and well-being, is actually a slower but more enhanced route to profit, which I think is quite fascinating. And so I think that's all great. I'm conscious of time. We've had some questions about some of the reports I've mentioned. The ones we've published already are all available on hellobenefits.com. So if you click on the resources tab, you can download those. As we produce them, if you follow us on social, you'll start to get updated with those as they get reported. So from the last kind of few minutes, if I come to you first, Michael, when we think about the future, if we think about maybe the next kind of 3 to 5 years, what are the kind of opportunities and challenges you think our customers are going to face? You might have already touched upon some of them, but if you could summarize what those are going to be, what do you think they might be?
Yeah, like I say, I think the opportunity for our customers and our HR and reward contacts is huge, largely from that position of influence and responsibility. And as Kathryn alluded to, it's something that everyone I know across HR and in the benefits industry has been championing for some time. It's the ability for teams to have a meaningful impact on business strategy, the performance and care of people. So I guess it's having that seat at the top table, being able to make a strategic impact to the organizations that you work for. I think that capability has always existed. I think the difference is it's now being recognized. If you open up, BBC website or whatever news outlet it is that you use, pretty much every day now there's an article about employee experience or hybrid working, on what organization is employing what policy for their employees. So I think there's now recognition that it's critical to the future of work. So I think understanding the key step for me, or any of the contacts we work with, is to understand, in terms of company purpose, business objectives, how do you align the work that you're doing so it complements and adds to that vision? And I think that's how you really establish some influence within your organization. But having established that influence, it will also open up the resources for you to do more, hopefully get more funding, more budgets, and find more creative and more effective ways to support your employees.
Excellent. Completely agree with that. And Kathryn, kind of challenges, opportunities?
Got to rebuild our workplaces is probably how I'd sum it up. The pandemic has massively advanced the future of work in many ways, and we can't lose that. We mustn't take a step back. We must keep that momentum. But we also have a vast amount of rebuilding to do. There's a lot that we've lost, and I would call out culture, I would call out employee experience, I would definitely call out well-being and that sense of belonging. So I think, to Michael's point, when it comes to the vast array of priorities we have facing ourselves, which are going to do that, which are going to make the biggest impact, we cannot do them all. And I think that's really hard for us as HR professionals to get our heads around, because we want to do everything, to help our people and help our organisation. We've got to make some choices. So which is going to make the biggest impact? How do we maintain the momentum we gained in terms of the positive steps forward, ensuring our workplaces are accessible and inclusive to all? But how do we really prioritise the stuff that is going to make that biggest difference, with that really very, very human focus on those individuals and those people that we have a responsibility to take care of, to help take our business forward?
A really great point to end on. I think we've covered this expanding role within kind of HR and reward and benefits, these huge responsibilities, lots more eyes on that kind of function and the wider HR function. So you're not going to be able to do everything, right? It's just going to be impossible. So being selective about where we're going to make the impact and putting the time to think about where am I going to have the most positive impact and invest in there, and seeing all of this as a journey rather than I've got to get all this stuff right. And I think you touched on it, Kathryn, where people like to compare themselves with each other's, right? This business is doing all these things, I should be doing that too. And I think, your best employee experience is about improving what you've already got and making that better, and kind of forgetting everyone else and just moving forward at the pace with the resource that you've got as an organisation. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon. Thank you so much to Kathryn and Michael for sharing your views. Really, really valuable. And we shall see you all again soon. Thank you.